happened? You know why? Because the ICC is rubbish, and Netanyahu doesn't care.
To continue the case for side proposition, I look to Robert Amsterdam.
Thank you. You know, I'm very humble. I'm not an academic, but I know something of reality. You see, I represent the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And I will tell you, I'm not hailing the ICC. Our people are being murdered and raped by Rwanda. By the way, supported by the government of the United Kingdom. Don't tell me about the glory of international criminal tribunals when I see murder, genocide, and rape in the Congo, the one country they seem to have focused on, at a cost, by the way, of 250 million euros per conviction. Imagine if they had given that money to African governments. It was something that the ambassador said when he was at Sierra Leone court, musing about how beneficial it would be to fund the local courts. Because I'm going to tell you something, these courts have no enforcement power. And if you have no enforcement power, you're not really a court. You know what you are? You're a group of Western liberal countries enforcing your rules on the rest of the world, called the Global South. It's shameful to pretend that this is justice. It is shameful to have a tribunal on Rwanda and not put Clinton in the dock. Where was he? Where was he when Rwandans were suffering? Where was Kofi Annan? And yes, I did do the Tadanki case, and we made law before the UN Disciplinary Tribunal because I proved that the United Nations was corrupt and that the United Nations had corruptly conspired with Zimbabwe. And what did it do? Nothing. Because this international justice shows that it is very often a chimera for the West, for those who were the colonialists and still are, whose companies are engaged in predation globally with no controls. You want to know about international law and what's effective? Bilateral investment treaties are effective because they protect Western business. Nothing else matters. Gaza happened, you know why? Because the ICC is rubbish and Netanyahu doesn't care. Nobody cares. Does Putin care? No, he doesn't care. In fact, let me tell you what the Ukraine has done. The Ukraine has visibly polluted everything possible to dehumanize Russians and make us never want to negotiate with them. And they went to the ICC. Yes, terrible crimes were committed, but they went there to make it impossible to negotiate with Putin because the corrupt Zelensky regime knows that only by keeping the parties apart can that war machine go on. The tainting that the ICC does is notorious. When I represented Bobby Wine in Uganda, a man who was tortured nearly to death by that bastard Museveni, it was Museveni who had the backing of the ICC. He was the one who sicked the ICC on Kony so he could look like he was part of the rule of law. This is the rule book of African dictators. Fine. He manipulated the ICC, and very often those at the ICC that are ignorant of the local conditions. And this happens all the time. These international tribunals are manipulated by the West to deflect responsibility. And these tribunals are not democratic. They are political. In fact, right here, Ms. Sharpton has made that point about the European Court, about the Court of Justice, that it's political, it's politics. And the point is that when you engage, at least we have the argument at the Court of Justice that it's a constitutional court. It's nothing like these international tribunals, the ad hoc tribunals, or these shameful ICC that we see now. And when we talk about the International Court of Justice, let's talk about the fact that the smaller countries are using it to get some of the issues on the table. The bigger countries are using it to rally round the flag. As in the Russia-Ukraine case, there are 33 interveners. Nobody's doing it because they think Russia's going to listen. They're doing it as a sign, a signal, a propaganda tool. It's manipulation, it's art, it's exhibition. It's nothing to do with law. We have debased law. We are using sanctions like they're candy. We are ripping away people's human rights, the same people that are supporting these courts. And let me say something about the European Court. I represent the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Ukraine, a 1,000-year-old church being destroyed by the Zelensky regime. We need help. Our priests are being tortured. Our churches are being stolen. You would think we could go to the European Court of Human Rights, but we can't, because first we have to exhaust local remedies. And the Ukrainians know that. So what do? They stick us in the Court of Appeal for 5 years. Can I have some water? And by sticking us in the Court of Appeal, they deprive us even getting to the European Court. Structurally, it's impossible. And one of the things about human rights, if you want to talk about human rights, I'll tell you something. When they were torturing Bobby Wine in Arua, and we had to save him, I'll tell you something, there was no court I could go to. There was no court you could go to. There's no instant justice. When they were torturing Job Sakala in Zimbabwe, there was no court to go to. When SADC, the group of countries in Southern Africa, got together and decided they were going to sanction Zimbabwe for beating the hell out of their white farmers, Mugabe was powerful enough to close the court down. We need to understand that these courts are largely dependent on those countries that are, firstly, willing to fund them and support them, and secondly, those that are committed to the very same institutions and legal theories, like the West under the European Court. Yes, there have been some transitions as a result of the European Court, but you can't get there with any sense of urgency. We need to rethink human rights. We need to start over. We need to set up a situation where these courts can actually respond in something like real time. The velocity of change is too great. The manipulation by the West is too strong. The inability of the global South to have its voice heard, and the inability of all of us to look at the structure of genocide. Genocide does not happen because of one man or two men. If you look at Rwanda and you look at the court's activity in going after the radio station, how shameful that we went after the radio station and we didn't talk about what was really going on the ground. And we now understand there was a lot more happening in Rwanda, especially when all of those victims turned around and launched one of the greatest assaults on humanity that is going on right now in the Congo, with no help from the ICC after a 20-year investment. Our church in Ukraine, no coverage, by the way, in the Western press, because everybody has decided Zelensky's a god, and there's only black and white now. No. Thanks to the ICC and the conditioning of the West that Russians are now non-people, that they are non-people, that they are monsters we can't deal with. Thanks to that, there is no balance in terms of what's actually going on in Ukraine. And our journalists are afraid they won't tell us what's going on. They don't want to tell us what's actually happening on the ground. And this too is a function of the perversion of law. No. And what I would call the presumption of regularity. You empower people with a certain ideology. You empower them with the control and the ability to engage in this fabrication to their own benefit of law. Well, let me tell you something. The rule of law is a very delicate thing. And all these people hyperventilating about, oh, Trump is sanctioning the ICC. Well, let's talk about the West's massive use of sanctions that devalues the rule of law and dehumanizes everyone with a Russian last name. These international courts are a danger because they're a fiction. They make you believe they're a court, which they're not. They make you believe they're dispensing justice, which they don't. And lastly, even if they do, they don't do it in any kind of relevant time, relevant way in the 21st century. This proposition should be the beginning of a rethink of how these courts are established and what we need to do to bring justice to the entire world. Justice in Russian, in Chinese, in English, in Hindi. We need a global understanding of what encompasses justice. And we need to train our lawyers and find a way of empowering domestic courts. On behalf of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, we sued Apple. We took Apple to court in France and in Belgium because Apple was engaged in obtaining the 3T minerals. They were obtaining them from, we believe, Rwanda, stolen from the Congo. Within 2 days of this criminal complaint being filed, Apple stopped and no longer is sourcing from Rwanda. And if we have now polluted every supply chain. So every company engaging in the purchase of 3T minerals now has to understand they could be engaged in money laundering and mineral laundering. That's justice, not this crap. Thank you very much.